For any would-be writers or amateurs or beginners in the audience, including myself, do you recommend submissions to small magazines, small press, and do you recommend writing courses? You teach them, well, obviously you recommend that.
Yeah, I think we just have to do everything all the time to keep ourselves writing. And taking writing courses is a good thing to do, and especially if you can get in a class where there's people where the ages are mixed up. I know Lansing Community College has great classes where there are established writers and new writers who come together. And I don't know if we have any outside, I don't know if anybody around here does outside classes, but I know in Chicago you can just go take a class with a person. You know, there's people to do, and if you're lucky enough to live in Minneapolis, you go to the Loft, and they have writing classes at the Loft. But I think writing groups are the most important thing, and they're free, and you get together with your pals, and you find people who are, often the purpose of the class is to find the really good writers, and then you court them, because you want them in your life. These good writers who also can critique your work. And then you make what I had to do, because I came from this mathematics background. I originally studied philosophy in college, and then I studied math as a graduate student. But what I found is that I wasn't a good critic at first, and I realized in taking the writing class, when I got some good feedback from other people, I said, I want more of this. How can I get this? And what I knew is that I could get this by giving it. If I could learn to be as good a critic as these folks were, they would be willing to invite me in their circle. And so I worked really hard to be able to help other people. And the nice thing now is that helps me now for teaching. The way I teach is that I just treat my students like they're my colleagues, and I critique their stories as though they were in my writing group. And so those skills have been really important, so that was a good call right from the beginning. And so I was able to have a couple of good writing groups that help me a lot with my stories. So I would advise anything you can do. If you're interested in writing, you need to get with like-minded people. And I wonder, does this bookstore have a writers group?
We have groups that meet here.
Yeah, that's good, because you really, I mean, bookstores are the places it should be happening. And then they come in and maybe buy a book or two, maybe once in a while.
If they can afford it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Writers often are not among the they're not among the high wage earners.
I just want to ask a question, if I may, about your stories. I have a set, you know André Gide, the French writer? Gide, who's a Nobel Prize winner, Gide had a sense that really a novel should not end. So you read Gide and you get that sense that it will go on. I have that sense. Now, French lit was my field, so, okay, that's why that happened. But as I read the new book, you have a couple of stories in there that seem to me not to end. They could go on. Which is
well, it's a challenge.
I wonder, is that deliberate for you? Well, obviously,
okay,
writing is deliberate. I mean, there's
yeah.
no
Well, no, and it's an interesting thing you ask about in general about endings, and I think endings are problematical potentially in all of contemporary realist fiction.
Yeah, I think
not
that's true.
all endings. We know what an ending of an O. Henry story is.
Right.
Aha! Oh.
Exactly.
And we don't get those anymore. We don't get to have those. We rarely get to have those. Sometimes shorts will have those endings. We don't have those very much anymore. And I think in realist fiction, which most of us write, we're looking for something that still feels realistic, but is also an ending. But is also an ending. It resolves something or presents something in a new light, but doesn't wrap everything up. And so you'll find that a lot of people who've not read much contemporary literature, especially students, are really not satisfied with contemporary stories' endings. I mean, a lot of people there's no comfort in them. And I think people who read, say, murder mysteries a lot, there's not a lot of comfort. There's a comfort at the end of the murder mystery because you know who done it.
Yeah.
And I think realist fiction, it's just, you don't get quite as much, and what I find is that the endings just plain don't work for everybody, you know. So I think having that open mind that you're talking about, where you are sort of allow it to not demand
Not
such a perfect
conclude.
ending.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to do with our times that we live in. That
Times
we
are-
don't trust the big ending.
It's ambiguous.
Yeah, it's ambiguous, and I do have to say though, also one of my short stories that you know, my normal thing when a phone goes off, I make the person come back and tell a funny story. That's usually the
Okay,
rule.
Bill?
But I did end up, my novel is actually comes off of one of the stories. So I obviously didn't think it had finished either. So the story Family Reunion has been expanded into my new novel, Once Upon a River.
Yeah, that's exactly the
So-
sense I have. Barbara King Salvage says the same thing about Pigs in Heaven,
Yeah.
that she knew she hadn't finished with that character. And
Yep.
then years later, she was able to come back on the Bean Trees and do another novel.
Yeah,
But
but
I
you
do
want
have that sense, and actually I appreciate what you said, because it may be more common in contemporary writers. I read a lot, so.
Yeah, I mean Dickens winds it up for you. Dickens,
Yeah, 19th century is
Dickens
finished,
gets.
yeah.
He feeds the orphans. He feeds the hungry. If you're dead, too bad for you. But the rest, everybody else gets wrapped up. You know, you get married. I just read Emma. I confess I hadn't read it before, and everybody's married at the end, and everybody
Yeah.
gets all taken care of. And you know, even though nobody did a lick of work during that whole damn novel,
All knots are tied.
I was all ready to like go out and dig a ditch and swear and try to rise above my station. I wanted to just rebel after reading that gorgeous book. But what's that?
Maybe it's because you're right about the times we live, the options seem larger. In the 19th century, the novel ends, somebody dies or something else happens, even in the great, great novels like Bovary. I mean, you know, they end.
The ship sails.
But that's what I had in the sense in American Salvage. A number of
Yeah,
your
and I think
stories,
you'll see that in a lot of
they could
contemporary.
go on, and that's, for me, a plus. I like that, the fact
But you'll
that-
find a lot of students, I notice, who've read only older fiction.
And they
A
can't
lot of
adjust.
students have a hard time figuring out why that, or if they've only read the genre. I want to just briefly get back to the literary magazine issue. Do you know there are probably 2,500 physical literary magazines in the country, and only a few hundred people read most of them. But it's still the place where the important work is getting published.
You can
That
get
is
started.
where it's getting published. But I do think that online is more important now. Online stuff is more important because more people see it. And I had a little experience where I submitted to the Kenyon Review, fabulous magazine, and they sent me a note and said, "We've accepted you for our online version." And at first I was grumbling, grumble, I don't want to be an online. Then I started thinking, Kenyon Review has a very big, for a literary magazine, Kenyon Review has a big subscription rate. I mean, they publish 3,000 copies, which is more than most. But, okay, so that's 3,000. On their online, on the site,
It's 30,000.
I'll probably get, my story may well get 10,000 hits. So I wanted, and I used to think maybe, we put our best work in magazines and our lesser work online, but that's exactly wrong, because the work that more people see, you want to have prominently displayed. So now I do think about having some work online at all times and trying to have some work. And the nice thing too is you can, on my website, I can link to those stories. So there they are. As well as linking to mittenlit.com, where all the important Michigan literary news gets published.
Now, are the online requirements for submission as stringent as for the magazine, the physical?
They're all different, and there's one, anybody who's interested in publishing either online or in magazines needs to go to Duotrope, DUORTROPE.com.
Somebody better write that down.
Yeah, Duotrope. Think of the magazine Zoetrope, and then it's Duotrope. And that's a clearinghouse for all the magazines, online and physical magazines. All the guidelines are in there. They link to all the magazines, all the information you could ever need. And not only that, but they have an online manager, so you can keep track of who you've submitted to.
Oh, wow.
It's a really nice service, and so far it's free. When I was using it, I sent them $10 every once in a while because they asked for money. It's such a handy. It used to be we used to buy that big Writer's Market book. I don't know if anybody remembers that.
They're still around.
Yep, I have one in the car. I was going to
got 'em
show
at
it to
home,
people, but the online Duotrope service, and there's a couple other ones. I think there's one called Lit Mag online, and they can keep up to date and make instant changes, and you can always know who the editor is because the editor changes every year, so those books were always a little bit out of date. But you really can find out all the information, and you need to, if you're going to submit, you need to start figuring out which are the magazines you respect, and especially online, there's a bigger difference between the good ones and not so good ones. You know, the paper ones, at least you could always see it and say, looks pretty good. Yeah. The online ones, you might want to make sure this is something that's been online for a while, or check and see if good people are being published in there, or is this the editor or somebody, you know, is the editor somebody I'm familiar with, but the online is, it's there to stay.
No, can I ask one?
Oh, yeah.
I'm curious to know how you stay in touch with lives you can't be leading. Young teenage girls who grow up in a meth lab culture, they're all around us, but
I don't think that's me.
How do you maintain that assurance that you've captured it just right?
I don't ever know for sure, and that's why it sometimes takes me years to write a story, because I want to make sure